This conference will now be recorded.
If this works, this is a short audiovisual presentation. You may or may not hear the audio, but that's not too important. But this is literally 90 seconds that gives you the beginnings of the makings of a sense of what we're trying to build. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that that short audiovisual presentation.
Thank you, Arthur.
I hope everybody can still hear me. Things have moved on a bit since the Welsh Government, or we as part of Welsh Government, produced that, and we're moving towards concepts like digital twin now, and this is just a screen grab from an interactive digital twin composition for the site and for the project that we have in development at the moment. So I'm extremely conscious that with this slide, I'm teaching many grandmothers how to suck eggs, because it's a kind of potted history of the rail industry, which you're far more expert in than I certainly ever will be. But suffice to say, it's an old industry. It's critical today, as it was through the Industrial Revolution, of which South Wales and the railways of South Wales were a critical part, of a size and scale in the 21st century, which I guess is comparable to the telecoms industry, so at least 200,000 people working for the railways, and it's an important contributor to the UK economy. But in Welsh Government, and I suppose to give you a sense of the genesis of this whole project, the focus in Welsh Government post-devolution just over 20 years ago, up until a certain point, was probably more focused on the automotive industry and the aerospace industry. But going back 5, 6, 7 years, there was an increased focus on the railways, the developments, the movement towards establishing Transport for Wales, attempts to bring a manufacturing base to Wales, and CAF, as many of you will be aware, have established a manufacturing base in Newport, near Cardiff, and in amongst those conversations, so far more conversations going on than had kind of been the case for the 10 to 15 years previously with rail industry stakeholders. And they all seem to be saying in the margins of those conversations that the UK really lacked dynamic, fit-for-purpose, world-class testing facilities. So I was asked almost exactly 4 years ago just to see if there was anything in this for Wales. And 4 years on, we've almost got to the point where we'll be putting a shovel in the ground and actually delivering the answer to that question about dynamic, world-class test facilities for the UK that has vexed many people over many years, and not least my colleague Andy, Professor Doherty, who is one of many stakeholders UK-wide who've thought long and hard about where and how something like this could be established in the UK, but nobody's been quite able to pull it off until now, we hope. So there are some test facilities in other parts of Europe. Indeed, there are limited facilities here in the UK. There's nowhere to test infrastructure properly in Europe, and a lot of companies, public and private, including Network Rail, have been doing a lot of testing in the USA in the facility in Pueblo, the high plains of Colorado. So that's not the most logistically helpful or cost-effective way of running a test program, as you can imagine. So I think some of the principles and the headline points that have been relayed back to us over the past 4 years is that the absence of a dynamic test facility has meant that innovation has either been deferred or delayed or denied entirely. Things take a long time to progress from the bright spark of an idea to a concept, an application, something that works on the live railway here in the UK. And organisations like the RSSB, who are very supportive of what we're doing, will concede that because of the difficulty of bringing innovation through on the railways, very often the standards lag where ideally they should lead. So organisations like the RSSB would like to be in a position more often to say, well, in 5 years' time, we want this structure to be 50% of the weight it is today, to have 70% less of the carbon content than it does today. We want it to cost half as much, and we want it to last 40 years longer. Now, that's the sort of principle of standard setting which can then let the industry go away and deliver. And of course, in order to deliver, they need a test facility as part of that process. So we're hoping that a virtuous circle will be created, or the missing piece, the missing link in that virtuous circle will be created as part of this process. So our vision is to be a world leader, and innovation, as Andy will expand on all this from a far more technical perspective than I can offer in a short while. But with innovation running through the heart of this project in all aspects, so from concept and design through the build and into the operational delivery. And we will be offering a unique to Europe integrated commercial service. So it's not all about research and development and innovation. There are some other more functional aspects to this project which are important to those customers that are looking for those services, but will also be important to the company that's building and running this facility, because we have to pay the mortgage too, and we have to keep the lights on. So more functional offers like warm storage for rolling stock, for example, and maintenance, including heavy and light maintenance, all those sorts of one-stop shop service offers will be a part of the overall vision. And after endless iterations and interactions with industry, and this is something that very much has been developed in partnership with industry, this is you saw the animation at the beginning of this presentation. Well, here's the technical arrangement that's taken us through the planning process. And I might actually ask Andy to jump here in a sec before I kind of carry on, just to illustrate the importance and the relevance of the different loops, the 2 loops, as you can see. Andy, do you want to kind of talk us through the way this has been thought through and designed?
Yeah, thank you, Arthur. So what you see in front of you is a diagrammatic form of what's now currently the Helen mine. Over to the west is the big hole in the ground, which is now finished coaling. But the high-speed loop is designed in the main to be a train test loop, and not dissimilar to the likes of Wildenrath, Willem, and one or two other facilities. The idea is to keep the infrastructure constant and allow the train builders to play and develop their train. The speed is set to be about 110 miles per hour. I think there are people who'd like it to be 300 miles per hour, but that would have taken up quite a lot of South Wales, and practically speaking, not possible. Inside that is an inner loop, which is much shorter, which is going to be the infrastructure test loop. And I suggest for yourselves, and particularly this call, PWI, this is all about testing infrastructure. So the idea is we're going to load up some trains, either heavy freight trains or actually crush-loaded passenger trains, actually pushing the limit, probably plus 10%, maybe even up to 30-ton axle loads in the freight vehicles, because what we want to do is test the infrastructure. And we can actually, in this loop, we've deliberately gone for a lower speed, for 45 miles per hour, because it's about axle passes and tonnage. So the intent here is to put on somewhere around 20 million tons a year, 20 MGT, over a period of time. And the idea is to run the train for a period of time and test the infrastructure. So actually, this is the giant toy train set for PWI members to play with testing of points, crossings, noses, sleepers, fastenings, etc., etc. And obviously, it's bi-directional, etc., etc. But there's two clear test facilities here: rolling stock and infrastructure. So, Arthur, if we go back, and I'll let you get on with the rest of it. We'll come back to the description, detailed description of that in a minute.
Sure, and just to add to Andy's comments, the bottom right-hand corner of this technical arrangement, that's currently the coal washery. So the larger part of the site where the loops are located, that's actually been mined as an open cast site from, where are we, east to west over the last 70 years or so. So the big hole, as Andy pointed out today, is just beyond the western curve of the large loop, but back in the late 1940s, it was right on the other side of this map. And it's an area of roughly 1,000 hectares all told, but we'll be acquiring about 550 hectares. So just to give you a sense of scale, in the bottom right-hand corner, the washery site and the branch line, the Neath and Brecon line, runs directly into the site. It's been there's been coal being taken out of this site by rail for many decades, and that washery site is where our headquarter building will be located, the kind of command and control center, the sidings, workshops, hotel. We expect the bottom right-hand corner there, industrial units and a training facility, a university consortium-led research development innovation center. So most of the buildings will be in that bottom right-hand corner, and obviously everything kind of leading up to those two test loops that Andy's been describing. So just to expand a little on what we've both been saying, there are those three core business lines: rolling stock testing and infrastructure testing, as Andy was explaining, and also the storage and maintenance dimension that I touched on earlier. But I think if the people on this call were given 5 minutes to think of potential additional or ancillary business lines, this slide would very quickly become 10 slides or 20 slides, because there are actually 1,001 things that potentially could be done on a site like this, connected as it is, and with the scale of the opportunity, the physical opportunity on offer. But these are some of the headline, if you like, ancillary business lines that we've identified. There are many others, but certainly system integration, I'm sure Andy will have a bit more to say about that, because these two loops will connect with each other, and that provides an opportunity which Andy will elaborate upon, for whether it's Network Rail or HS2 or anybody else, to address some of the system integration challenges that have blighted major rail projects over the years, Crossrail perhaps being the most recent and painful example. And some of the major organizations that have worked on Crossrail have talked to us and said, well, if GCRE existed when we were planning delivery of Crossrail, a raft of the problems we experienced and the time and cost overruns that we experienced could have been significantly mitigated. So system integration and how both loops may connect and talk to each other is something that Andy will elaborate upon. Calibration assurance, certainly very important for us, the training and education dimension. There'll be a property piece to this as well, a very interesting energy agenda. And again, Andy will have more to say about that, but the aim will be to achieve net zero status for this, for the GCRE site in due course. It will, as you'll appreciate, with 2 electrified loops and the sort of work we'll be doing, it will be a site that consumes a lot of power, a lot of energy, and we do have grid connections. If you refer back to the earlier slide, both National Grid and Western Power distribution systems literally passing over the site. But we're also looking, and will be looking in more detail, at opportunities to connect to local renewable generation. There are lots of wind farms, existing wind farms, very near to this site. There are others in planning, and we think we also have a very good opportunity to develop some of our own renewable energy generation on site, whether that's solar or wind, or excuse me, a combination of both. We know this will be a site that is uber connected digitally. It will produce an enormous amount of data, and anybody who's been inside a train with the kind of roof of the carriage moved will see that there are thousands of miles of cables in the vehicles, and it'll be the same thing in control and signaling centres. So there'll be enormous amounts of data produced at this site, and a huge part of the railway of today, and certainly the railways of the future, is how that data is used to develop better applications and services and technologies that are more resilient and more effective. So the digital and data opportunity is very exciting. Things like drones, and Andy and I have had a conversation with Ofcom, the regulator in this context, and we think we can be licensed to do all sorts of interesting things with drone technology at this site. And then there are a whole raft of real world and digital security and cyber security challenges, and flip side of that, opportunities we can explore. A lot of intellectual property will be developed at this facility, and there may be opportunities for us to partner with some of the clever innovators that are developing that intellectual property. I've mentioned a hotel. Well, there may be, that's the obvious leisure offer. The Brecon Beacons, I should have said this, but the Brecon Beacons National Park is literally, quite literally, on the doorstep of this site. So what we can offer the park is additional accommodation which is sorely needed. But to develop a hotel, the park is largely a seasonal attraction, but we will be attracting academics, engineers, innovators, researchers, technicians from all corners to this site all year. So we kind of make the case for a hotel by establishing this facility, and there are certainly some level of interest being expressed by certain parts of the automotive and aerospace industry as well. So some of this I've already touched upon, but we have assigned, sealed, delivered land option, so we can push the button on that 550 hectare acquisition in the coming months. We'll do that when the part of the site that is subject to a statutory restoration scheme is completed. Back in August of this year, a huge milestone for the project, really. We were granted full planning permission by the local authority partners, Powys and Neath Talbot. And, referring back to the comment I made earlier about others having tried and not succeeded in identifying a site somewhere in the UK to do something like this over the last 20 years and more, the challenge of finding a circa 550 hectare site cost effectively, mainline railway connected, with neighbours who are content to allow you to run trains 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That's not a straightforward thing to pull off in these crowded islands. So as much as perhaps any other milestone over the last 4 years, getting to the point where we secured that planning permission back in August was really fundamental to the entire project. Otherwise we would be forever in PowerPoint land and not actually delivering a real facility, a real project. We're well supported by both the Welsh Government and the UK Government. So collectively, they've committed £70 million of capital to this project. It's going to cost a fair bit more than that. So the private sector will be asking them to dip into their pockets as well in due course. But the public funding comes first and allows us to make a start. Ground investigations underway, have been for some time. So boreholes across the site. No nasties identified so far. So far so good in terms of the GI, and that exercise will report back in January. We think towards the end of January. So at the moment, and that process is well underway. There's nothing in terms of the site itself that it looks as if it's likely to present us with an insurmountable problem. And just to kind of elaborate a little on the initial introduction, I was project leader until August of this year in Welsh Government, when the new GCRE company, Special Purpose Vehicle SPV, was established. So I've gone from government to a startup. Andy is our Chief Technology Officer some of the time. He's also doing important work for other clients across the continent, and he may have something to say about that. But he's the critical railway expert, technical advisor for us. And our Chief Executive is a guy called Simon Jones, who chaired the project board that I reported to in Welsh Government. He was Director of Economic Infrastructure in Welsh Government and is now leading the GCRE Limited company. So what are our immediate priorities? Well, we've completed the company business case. So that support from government, the initial commitment by both governments was predicated on an outline business case produced by the Welsh Government team and supported by Arup actually as an external advisor for us. But we've now developed the company business case, which was a necessary and more detailed next step. And literally as of last Friday evening, that was pinged across to officials in Cardiff Bay and in London. That business case will be reviewed over the next few weeks, 5-6 weeks or so, and ministers in the UK government and in our Welsh government will make a final informal decision to release that funding so that the work can get underway by the middle of February. So we are literally at that, at the cliff edge, perhaps might be one way of describing it. We've made significant progress in developing the partnership with a consortium of universities led by Birmingham. For those of you who are not as familiar with the kind of higher education landscape in the UK in the railway context, Birmingham has established quite a reputation. I think it's certainly the biggest rail research centre in the UK and perhaps in Europe as well. And you see Andy's nodding. So it's a very large centre for rail research. They've also been the catalyst for developing something called UCRIN, which is the UK Rail Research Innovation Network, and Birmingham have partnered with universities like Huddersfield and Southampton in close orbit and in slightly extended orbit, Loughborough and Heriot, I think, and a range of others, Swansea here in Wales. And in due course, we think that innovation accelerator can be established at our site, employing about 60 academics and researchers, engineers and technicians, and will become, we expect, a part of that UCRIN family. And I've mentioned the gateway process, which will be concluded by February. So the formal go no go is as this is not China, it's Wales and it's the UK, so ministers will have their final say in February. So I've talked about the 70 million of government commitment to the capital project, but this is a circa 200 million project. So we will be taking a prospectus to market within the next 12 months or so. We're wholly owned by Welsh Government today, but when the private sector becomes a formal part of the process, then that public sector shareholding will diminish, and it'll diminish below 50%. So these are the things that remain to be determined. So the land option and the ground investigation condition I've described. We've handed over the business plan, and we're also looking at the viability of the energy strategy for this site. These packages, they're either out to tender or they're about to be put out to tender via the Sell to Wales online procurement site. So the earthworks design and build, that's in tender evaluation stage as we speak. I think the master plan, site master plan tender, that's out as well, to be closely followed by an outline railway system design and the energy strategy, the energy plan for this site that I've just mentioned. And all these packages will be tendered separately, but those involved will be required to work together. And to ensure that they do, Transport for Wales, obviously a close partner for us here in South Wales, they'll be providing that supervision and integration function so that we kick off in February and end up in July with a series of joint workshop sessions every couple of weeks, making sure that all these pieces of work integrate, fit together, work together. And here's the outline program. So we're in the top left-hand corner at the moment, development and pre-delivery, if you like. That first diamond is the public funding final investment decision. And as you can see, there'll be a private sector funding decision to be concluded by March, April of 2023. Now, in terms of what you're actually going to be seeing on site over the coming months and years, we think we can establish a first stage warm storage operation for around 100 vehicles by October next year, 2022. So we hope and expect to be in revenue by the autumn of next year. We think we can have some sort of fairly basic initially training offer geared at the industry, available from September, October 2023. But in terms of those two test loops and full operational capacity, that target is currently set at April 2025. So the big kind of First Minister and Prime Minister or Secretary of State moment comes in early 2025. And all being well, we'll be commencing vegetation clearance in February. That full earthworks program, the design work will be done between February and August. So 3.5 million cubic meters of material will need to be moved on this site. It's not flat. It's not a flat desert plain. So creating the landform will be the first big challenge as we design and prepare for what goes on that landform, the rail infrastructure. I've talked about the warm storage capacity and full operational capacity in 2025, and this is just another screen grab which does give you a sense that this is not flat as a pancake site, and there's a lot of material to be moved. And at this point, that's the general bit out of the way, if you like, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear you've kind of heard more than enough from me. And now this is the more kind of technical research and development, innovation, the interesting, the guts of this project really. And Andy has been giving a lot of thought to this. And the first slide kind of captures really what we're trying to achieve in microcosm, a whole railway system. Andy.
Yeah. Again, don't want to try and teach anybody to suck eggs here. The vast majority of this you will know in terms of what goes on, where the money goes in the railway. And as many of you will know, of course, everybody sees the railway as trains and stations. They don't really see the infrastructure. They don't really understand what goes on in the engineering, certainly below the trains, in the track, the whole railway system below it. It's invisible, and maybe that's right. But the reality is we do need to develop that. That's where the money goes. That's where a lot of good engineers spend their life developing and managing and maintaining that railway. And as we all know, it takes a long time to move some of this on, because we have to be careful. We all know that fiddling around with switch design, track design, etc., has to be done carefully. Of course, it's moved on over the years, but could we go faster? Are there things we could do better? Yes, of course there are. One's only go back to the Hatfield accident and the work that, well, Andy was involved as well, with me on the wheel-rail interface, and getting back to a recognition that wheels and rails, and particularly rails, are rather important in that equation. And it took us a long time. We went to Pueblo quite a lot to test new processes and new maintenance processes, whether it's for grinding, milling, different rail materials. The MHH rail materials were all developed through that process. Things like TrackX and Vitism were all developed in that time. But it took us, frankly, 7 or 8 years to do, which I would like to think if we had a test infrastructure like this, we could have done faster. So let's move on and have a look at the detail of it. So Arthur. Next slide, he says. Oh, thank you. So the headline, we know, there's obviously Melton, which tests trains. Irony of ironies, Network Rail doesn't really get much chance to test infrastructure at Melton because it's full of trains. Wildenrath Velim again focused on train testing. And so the high-speed loop very much focused on creating a main line realistic to a Network Rail 125 mile per hour railway. That's what it'd be built to, and we'll build it that standard electrified 125 kV, etc., to test trains and certified trains, and possibly European trains as well. So we're going to try and build it to a European gauge. That looks entertaining. But building it to that gauge, enabling whether it's CAF to test their European products or other manufacturers across Europe, so not just the UK but elsewhere. We talked about train storage, and of course that high-speed loop can also test and deliver mileage accumulation for new trains, something that doesn't actually happen very well today, as we well know that when new fleets go into service, they're largely unreliable, and the passengers take the brunt of learning the mistakes and getting the trains reliable. But the last thing there, the infrastructure loop, really, really important for us as a unique opportunity in Europe where we can actually test the infrastructure, test the track, test the civil engineering, overhead line, you name it, sensing systems, etc. And it's also worth making a note of that UK manufacturers, if they want to sell products abroad, they will need to have certification. They will need, is it a BS mark or a CE mark? Apparently that doesn't count in Brexit, but it bloody does in the European sense and in a world sense. So how do they get that certification when most of that certification facility was actually in Europe? We need that facility in the UK such that we can get, and long-term ambition of GCRE will be to get UCAS accreditation and enable suppliers to get their products approved and able to export to the world. The next slide, Arthur. So the infrastructure test loop, I think the most important and interesting thing for this particular seminar. The idea is we're going to load the infrastructure with high tonnage and lots of wheel passes. So it's relatively short. Ideally, we would have run faster and go longer, but of course that means a longer test loop, which means less and less passes. The idea of this is that, frankly, the facility will create periods of operation, for 3-month periods of operation, where we just basically load every test, every new type of track, sleeper, rail, you name it, on the loop, and then turn the train on and leave it running for 3 months. And then after 3 months, basically have a possession downtime where we can take equipment out, modify equipment, put new equipment in. Obviously, many bits of equipment will need to be left in for some time, and then run again for another 4 MGT. If we can squeeze it up to 5, that will be great, because then we can really get up to higher tonnages and represent actually what a railway does see. Most of these Wildenraths, Velims, etc., do about 1 MGT a year. Doesn't test the infrastructure at all. We think that the number, like Pueblo, the loop would be arranged that we'd have fraction strings of different rail manufacturers. We could test Benedict steels in there, certainly other ranges of steels, test the lubrication, test all the fixings and fastenings, the sleepers from different manufacturers. We can move into, why is a sleeper long and oblong? Why? Because it came out of a tree. Does it actually need to be that if it's an FRP? Would it get a better interaction with the ballast if we had different designs? We all know there are different designs proposed and in trial in some places, but those trials take a long time and limited in duration, whereas this gives you the chance to push that faster. We can also push things like composites in here, composites in the overhead line, composite in bridges, things that frankly Network Rail find rightly quite difficult to do on a main line because of the risk of failure, one, unreliability, two, and therefore the chance here of actually getting a whole life testing process going, testing everything from nose batter, so we might have a frog farm of maybe 10 noses of crossings that the train can run across and test the alliance, wheel transfer loads, batter to repair techniques, you name it, we can do it. And let's move on again. So let's say the train test loop will be built to a typical Cat 1A to 125 mile per hour Network Rail standard. Part of it may be built exactly the same as HS2's proposed design with a bit of slab in there and overhead line system. And the purpose is really to enable trains to be tested, certified, mileage accumulated. That means the infrastructure will have, the loop will have ETCS level 2 on it, and at least part of it with a traditional Class B normal system with track circuits, axle counters, all the things we know and love about the UK signalling system, particularly for those trains that don't work with them, as we well know from previous trains. The overhead line could be a bit more exotic in that respect. But typically speaking, you'd expect it to see it with UIC 60E2, grade A and 44 sleepers, etc., etc. There'll be lots of optical fiber and wireless systems around it to enable the connect up of all the test and monitoring systems, and it will be covered in GSMR 4 and 5G capabilities to monitor all that. Interestingly, part of that high-speed loop is an embankment that's 30 meters tall, and one of the first proposals that Network Rail are interested in is actually putting some monitoring in the bottom of that embankment as it's built, and looking at different ways of building sections of that embankment to look at ways that Network Rail are quite interested to learn from those in a way that enables them to go faster to some solutions that they wouldn't ideally try on the West Coast main line. And obviously all the noise and vibration things can be tested there too. If you go to the next one, which is the infrastructure test loop, as I say, designed to try and put 25 megatons MGT on a year. That's my aspiration. I've got to wind the train up to that. So we do plan to get the train perhaps up to 30-ton axle loads and plus 10% on a crush-loaded passenger train. Again, train controls Class B systems with some ETCS on, maybe all of it. Lots of different types of overhead line, and frankly, part of the loop will be traditional Network Rail mainline. Part of it will be serviceable equipment from Network Rail. Part of it could be limestone ballast of different types, or new types of new suppliers of granite ballast. Drainage is an opportune here because this site does have prodigious amounts of rain. And so the drainage system, great chance to test all the new systems there. And so we can load on loads and loads of tests and push them to their end of life much faster than we can in any other test facility. So let's move on again. I'm conscious of time here. The idea is that obviously we've got an interface area. We can cross over between the two loops. We could potentially test crew for HS2 in the transfer between the high-speed part of the loop that's HS2 and the inner loop, which is traditional network rail. What we've done is create crew 4 years earlier than crew will actually be able to be tested by HS2. Wouldn't that be nice to get it right beforehand? And all the interfaces that go with that. We will have plenty of opportunity to test all sorts of earthwork systems because we're obviously moving rather a lot of soil, 3.5 million cubic meters. This is an old coal mine, and so settlement is a major issue for us. We have to get it obviously consolidated, the whole substructure consolidated, and we will be able to then test everything from tampers to consolidating machines of all sorts and sizes on the loop. Let's move on again. There will be a control room to test and manage the control of the ETCS systems and the railway systems and railway class B systems. Obviously needs to be controlled for safety management, maintenance and access to the site, etc. We think we can probably do some early testing on the sidings earlier. And the concept is that reception area, the buildings down at the washery site, are very much the sort of public side of the test facility. And when you go through the door into the notionally air side, like an airport, it's a secure, safe environment. And frankly, human interaction will be limited because we want to be able to test equipment closer to the envelope than would be allowed on any railway. Let's move on again. So there are much more facilities in here. So the idea is that it be a research and innovation hub. Universities, as Arthur has mentioned, will be evolved. There'll be a lot of digital connectivity on the site. As Arthur has said, we're planning to use the renewable energies, but connect that up to enable us to run hydrogen trains and battery systems, because the entertainment about hydrogen isn't really the train, it's the infrastructure. How do you actually where does the hydrogen come from? How do you put it on a train on a regular basis? We all know hydrogen's a nasty stuff. It loves water and it brittleizes every bit of metal going. So how do you do that on a regular basis? Whole communications, 4G, 5G, 6G, that's all possible in this sort of area as well. So we think there's lots of opportunities in that that go much further than just rail. And of course, there's a whole rewilding opportunity in the middle of this site as well, and the possibility of putting a lot of trees back on the site as well as wind farms is huge, frankly. And Arthur hasn't mentioned it either, but of course the ambition here is that as this mine is closed, it's now no longer mining coal because basically it's extracted the coal from the designated site, and so there's about 18 months of coal on the site to be removed, been mined, but it's sitting in big piles. But there's an awful lot of people that won't have a job without this site developing into a railway site. So we hope that this will not only enable us to provide a good social service community provision in the area, but actually a rail training facility at the same time and connecting up with lots of other facilities in South Wales. So moving on, Arthur, I'm not sure how many more slides we've got to go. I think that's it really, isn't it?
That was it, yeah, I think that was it.
So, so Andy, we finished our presentation. Arthur, you might want to just say a few words to wind everything up.
I'm just trying to work out how I stop presenting, which I'm sure there's a button to press here, but I can't see where it is.
Bottom of the screen, you can unshare. Down, if you go to the bottom of you open up. If you go, but you say hover your mouse at the bottom, and you'll get the buttons come up, and there's a thing to unshare there. So
go further down, Arthur.
Okay, is it that one?
No.
It doesn't matter anyway. So we can do that in a minute. Okay. You all right, Arthur?
Yeah, I just can't get rid of the presentation.
Don't worry about that.
Don't worry, Arthur. Just thoughts.
Right. Well, can I say, wow. We've heard quite a lot about this sort of project. There's a bit been in the press, but I don't think anywhere I've seen sort of really detailed the sort of the breadth of the ambition for this site, and I think that's really exciting to see, a facility like that potentially coming to Wales. Yeah, so that's really good. So we've had a few questions come in. So Alan Wilkins asks, will it be possible to test trams and light rail vehicles and infrastructure?
Well, the answer is yes. And one of the things that we're sort of, if you like, at this moment, as Arthur said, we're looking at placing a contract for the sort of outline design of the site. At the moment, the design of the site is basically the product of my devious mind and Arthur's. We won't go into Arthur's mind, but the idea is that we can add all sorts of things into it. We've just got to be careful that there is a business for it. We think there is a business, frankly, for light rail, for vehicles. There's no reason why we add additional tighter loops in there. We've actually looked at the possibility of doing so. And as we go forward, the short answer is absolutely yes. If there's a benefit for doing so and people want it, we'll do it.
Yeah, and one industrial partner has already mentioned or registered an interest in a crash test area. So that could be another incremental addition to what you've seen. But as Andy's saying, all these things have to kind of wash their faces financially and commercially. So anything is possible, provided it works in terms of money in versus money out, to put it bluntly.
Crash testing would certainly put it on the leisure visiting.
We'd certainly get an audience for that, yeah, correct.
Absolutely, yeah. So Paul Ebbert asks, could the facilities be used for training, infrastructure maintenance or project staff in a relatively safe environment?
Big yes. Absolutely, yeah. Yes. I mean, it's I think everybody needs to understand this is as said on the slides, this is £200 million to build this. That's a lot of money to raise. It's a lot of reason why it's never happened before. So to make it work, we need to add every bit of business opportunity to make it work. And training and development of staff has got to be a high level, not just in terms of income, but also in that safe environment, in that we're not running a timetable, we're running a test facility. We can decide when and where we run things, and we can decide the interaction with people. And obviously, rule number one, it must be safe. And that means we can look at developing all these systems that currently Network Rail are experimenting with, that monitor staff on site, that create special ring zones in electronic terms, but actually have had teething issues, shall we say, and the place not to test that is on a main line. The place to test that is a test drive.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right, Craig Havard says, how will the test track be maintained? Is there a track geometry quality target to allow accurate testing of vehicles?
Yeah, the outer loop is going to have to be compliant to what I would notionally call the Network Rail Line Standard 1A, Cat 1A type standards for testing of high-speed vehicles. And clearly, we're going to need to maintain it to those facilities. What we sort of hope is that this is an opportunity for some of the manufacturers like Placer and Toya to come and play with their machines to actually learn how they can do that in a more effective way, yet more effective way than they do today. The inside loop, the infrastructure loop, I suggest, yes, it's got to be maintained. The question is, what geometry and quality target do we maintain it to? Might actually be deliberately poor. It might actually be to explore geometry limits. It might be to look at the age-old equation of which I think many of us on this call have experienced before. Do you try and maintain the track to a high quality? And if you do that and keep it there, is it cheaper to maintain than allowing it to be maintenance holidayed on a regular basis to the point where, frankly, it gets pretty decrepit, and then you have to spend rather a lot of money putting it back together again? This is a subject that I'm sure has troubled many of us on this call. Wouldn't it be nice to explore that and really produce the evidence of what the right solution is once and for all, and kill the accountants, you can't prove it bit, and I think you've got to save some money, you know? So
no, I think that's absolutely, yeah, I mean, that would be great. And my involvement with TSIs and things, I mean, clearly demonstrated, I think, that there is a gap between rolling stock standards and infrastructure standards, which is a result of the sort of empirical development, and it would be nice to actually close some of those gaps as well, wouldn't it, by able to actually do some testing to prove the point. Right, Andrew Wilson says, the Secretary is absolutely amazed with the possibilities on this site. How can the PWI help to bring it to pass?
Yes. Well, that's, you know, the reason why we're on this call is to hopefully excite you and get you involved in a sense that clearly we're in a process that's going to start with the earthworks, and there's you know, a lot of earthworks to do, and then, you know, frankly, a few sidings to put in. But the exciting bit is getting the loops in and you know, connecting it all together. But then it's going to be maintained and operated, and frankly, there is an opportunity for people to work on that. One, two, I think there's actually discussion to be had. At the moment, I'm the kiddie in the sweet shop going, oh, I want one of those and one of those. But actually, the greater mind of people on this call and in the PWI and will be very helpful to actually suggest things that could be done. Some of you may have had experience of other test facilities, and so there may be some knowledge there that we could usefully learn. So I think the door's open for a discussion about that. Perhaps a further session, Andy, of your of this group might help us with that bit, particularly in the southwest. We might be able to persuade, you know, COVID and God knows what rules allowing, eventually getting people to site and listen to some, you know, some wise expertise.
Yeah, I think that.
Thank you very much.
I think that's a really good idea. That kind of an open question. What are your thoughts individually and collectively about how we can add value to this whole process? I mean, actually, that you know, it's been an iterative process from day one as a Welsh Government project until recently. And whenever I've spoken to anybody from the rail industry, I've been at pains to point out that the government certainly is not the expert, and actually the government's motivation here is an economic development agenda. It's creating those jobs and opportunities that Andy was talking about. So we've relied on industry to inform the process from day one, and that very much needs to continue. And beyond that, I mean, it'd be fantastic if some of you become directly involved in delivery in some way, shape, or form. But that aside, enthusiasm and advocacy and word of mouth is really important to us. So if you've any kind of positive thoughts as a result of this conversation, please share them. Alternatively, of course, if you don't have positive thoughts, just keep them to yourself.
Okay, thank you, Arthur. Yeah, and I think, you know, with my involvement, I can certainly say that, you know, the universities are always one of the big challenges for them, is they have some absolutely great ideas, but it's difficult and getting increasingly difficult to go and test them on the main line, because of the safety risks and the performance risks that are important, and obviously those sort of things are going to be hugely important. I suspect, like Pueblo as well, once you start, it'll start making its own ideas. People will say, wouldn't it be good if it did this? Yeah, so I think that's good. Right, a couple more. Paul Ebbett has said, a good concept for a sponsored study to prove the track maintenance cost principles. Need to get Ukraine interested, as they're the experts at getting such funding. So that's
yeah, we're on that case. We're on that case, I can assure you.
Yeah, I can imagine you will be. Yeah,
we're discussing with various of the universities and potential for various EPSRC long-term grants, as well as the Network Rail R&D funding. Because we need to do more in these whole rail ballast sleeper degradation curves, etc. Frankly, most of the stuff that Network Rail uses today is based upon work that was done by BR in, you know, 40 years
the
ago.
60s. Yeah, a lot of it 60s and 70s. Yeah.
So
okay.
You know,
yeah. A question for me. Did you consider other track gauges as part of this? Because obviously there's a fair bit of meter gauge and 3'6" gauge and things in the world. I don't know whether that's.
Well, we haven't done. We are in the loading gauge. We are going to see whether we can build certainly the outer loop to European gauge, traditional GBC type gauge, but we haven't yet decided we could build a narrow gauge or even a wide gauge system. I think that would be very much subject to money. Basically, if somebody comes along and says, look, we'd really like to test our meter gauge train or you know, a wide gauge train, then really it's a question of, well, we need help with the money, because frankly, we've got to start with the standard gauge. You know, the bill is big enough as it is.
Absolutely.
But if somebody wants to pay for it, we're up for it.
Yeah, and of course, what we are doing is making sure that the trace is wide enough to ensure that we're future-proofed. So while we are clearly hopeful that we'll be very busy once we're open, Andy, you're helpfully suggesting that that should be the case. Well, if we get so busy that we can't accommodate everyone who'd like to use the facility, we do have the capacity to double track both the larger and smaller loops, and we'll have third, probably fourth rail as well, Andy, on the infrastructure test loop. So just to kind of square the circle on that one, while its primary function will be to test infrastructure, as Andy's been explaining in some detail, it can also be used for testing trains, and the sort of speed profile for that smaller loop is somewhere around 40 miles an hour, which is perfect really for underground type rolling stock. So it will have multi-functionality.
Just to answer Charles's question here too, clearly this facility is under the Railways Act. Any moving train guided, you know, it's under the regs, under ROGs for that. However, we will be looking for a test facility safety case. It doesn't need to be a mainline case. It needs to be an absolutely safe case, but it needs to be enabling us to explore the envelope in a way that we can't do on the main line. And one of the ways we'll be doing that will be to exclude, certainly from the infrastructure loop, when we're testing to destruction or end of life, frankly, we'd exclude people. We may well even have a very simple automation system, so there is no driver on that train either. Because the best way to test to destruction is not to have to worry about people. So keep them out of it, and then you can go a bit further. All us engineers, that's what a wonderful thing to be able to test to destruction, because we can never get there on the main line. We're never allowed to discover just how much further we could go and discover actually that certain things are perfectly safe. And we've been wasting money for years against other things that might actually be very dangerous that we're doing today, and we never realized it. And we're right on the cusp of failure. So, great way to explore that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I should add for those that, that sort of concept was used with the new stretcher bars for Network Rail.
Yep.
They're following the Lambrigg derailment. The tubular stretcher bars were, as mentioned, they had to go to America, but they were tested to destruction, including deliberately mis-setting them up, so to say, to impose extra forces. So yeah, and that's the sort of thing you can do. It's where the accelerated loading is really comes to a great advantage, isn't it? Because you can compress a lifetime into a much shorter period.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Any more questions? Oh, Alex Lee. Right.
Yeah.
Our president also runs a safe and effective working team in his spare time. I wonder if there might be some interest there in testing train detection and other safe track access devices to help track work.
That's exactly what we want to do, and exactly on the money. And one of the things that we sort of said is that whilst on one hand we expect the large companies to be coming in as partners, we're also trying to set ourselves up to be SME friendly as well, because we recognise that actually the innovation will come from, in most cases, from the smaller companies, and we need to enable that to happen as well. So both those things need to happen, and this is the place where we can do this testing of safe access devices. I mean, I was responsible for testing some of that on Network Rail, and it was problematic. Some of that were going on. I think we all know that. And actually, as a result, slow and cautious has been the process so far. Well, here we have a chance to challenge that.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I mean, the SME point is really well made and really important. So I've spoken to several SMEs over the last couple of years, including a Welsh SME based in Swansea, developing some really interesting LiDAR technology for the railways. And they and others have told me, having kind of successfully got grant funding to develop some of their ideas from Innovate UK research programs, that the money was very welcome, but when it came to the critical validation and test part of that process at the end, they were entirely left to their own devices and just couldn't get access to a test facility anywhere. And certainly a couple of people I spoke to ended up kind of sequestering a small bit of heritage line somewhere to conduct testing that really doesn't give that validation and certification that Andy was describing as being almost guaranteed when you're running very heavy vehicles with lots of axle passes over a test track like this. So we think it will provide open a door for the SME community, and of course that's part of the ambition of the rail sector deal for the UK to be leading the world in manufacturing and exporting rail-related technology. Well, how are we going to do that without getting these innovations through to market far more effectively than we have been doing over the past decades?
Okay. All right. If there are no more questions now, I would like to call upon Alan Wilkins to propose a vote of thanks. Over to you, Alan. Hello, Alan.
It's to turn his microphone on.
That's it.
Right. Can you hear me
Hello,
now?
Alan. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Well, I must admit I have found this a very interesting subject. When I first heard of this idea, and I think it was Ken Skates as the Welsh Transport Minister at the time,
Yep.
I was initially a bit wary, a bit cynical. But particularly taking account of how you've just set things out this evening and the progress you've made in getting the legal authorization for planning consent, it really does encourage me. And I think sort of the extreme west end of the Welsh coalfield is probably presents almost a unique opportunity, at least in the UK, as a suitable site. I think of my home area of Sussex. I think that's a complete no-no. But we did have a test site at Goodwood Racetrack. I mentioned the ridiculous for effect. But no, I'm very pleased to hear your descriptions tonight, and I think it's got very real potential, not only for the UK, as you rightly point out, but to complement the other sites like Wildenrout and Velin, and even the American one, which you've mentioned. And it looks as though this is being thoroughly developed, and I wish you well in achieving the final development stages and then getting the diggers in the ground. And I look forward to that official opening. What would it be? Late 2024, perhaps early 2025. Thank you both very much indeed. And by all means and I hope there will be sufficient conference facilities available via the host hotel and meeting rooms at the headquarters to hold suitable meetings there.
Yeah, I'm sure the PWI will be welcome to come along.
Thank you. Once
Right,
again, thank you both very much.
if I can ask people to unmute themselves and show their appreciation in the usual way. Right. So thank you very much. So just before we close, our next meeting will be on the 10th of January, and is about weed killing and line side control with Rachel Furness from Network Rail. And then on 14th of February, we're going to have our First Aid for Loved Ones session with Rob Natman, Network Rail. And I say we're looking at the moment to perhaps doing that in a venue in Cardiff, so we can do that as our first face-to-face meeting. So thank you once again for everyone coming, and can I wish everyone all the very best for the season, and we'll see you in the new year. So, thank you. We'll be staying on for a few minutes if anybody wants to stay on for a chat. So, yeah. So thank you, Andy, and thank you, Arthur. Very good. Yeah.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, first class.
Wonderful.
Yeah, exciting times, Andy. Yeah. So,
Indeed.
so
Very, very exciting, and lots of opportunities, and actually, particularly Wales, at the first of the regions that might well be interested in doing their own testing and not having to worry about doing it on the main line. You know, Wales is very engaged in the Network Rail R&D program, but actually aligning that and saying, well, actually, we can do it here in a safe, faster environment. Got to be a place for you.
well, yeah, and it just strikes me that there's there's a potential for building a science park there, isn't there? We're actually allied to this facility to actually to actually make use of it, isn't it? Yeah, and I can see your point that obviously the key thing to all this is it's got to wash its face commercially, hasn't it? So it's got to be busy, hasn't it, by definition, to
So
pay
yes,
for itself.
so the public funding it's well, it's critical. It wouldn't be happening without that 70 million from both governments. But of course, when you look at places like Velim, well, that was developed under the old Soviet system, so an entirely publicly funded concept. The test facilities in China, well, they're publicly funded. There's a new test facility being developed in Singapore that's being 100% funded by the public sector. So there is a challenge for us in that we have to raise private finance as well, and this thing has to wash its face. And of course, many of these established facilities elsewhere in Europe, they've been around for a very long time. So the cost of capital is well and truly sunk, whereas we're going to have to pay the mortgage as well as pay the operating costs. So it's not easy, as Andy was suggesting, and people have thought about this, tried, and it's a tricky concept to pull off, no question.
Yeah, I know, and I guess that's why there isn't another one, isn't it? I mean, I know there's there's been lots of talk about the need for it for a long time, hasn't there? But it's been really difficult anywhere in Europe to really start another one from scratch, isn't it? So.
Quite interestingly, when I just started off, and I spoke to some of the larger industry players, private sector players, and they would say, well, we desperately need this, but it's not absolutely core business for us, so we can't do it ourselves. We think it's a matter for government. And then when you spoke to the man from the ministry in the Department of Transport, he would say, well, it's a nice idea, but we think it's a matter for the industry to deliver. Yeah. So it was caught in betwixt and between those.
I think that's the problem
for decades, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm really excited that it's it's potentially February is spades in the ground time, so that's excellent news. So.
I hope he gets pulled off somehow. When I think of the Onllwyn site and the Onllwyn that I knew 35 years ago, 40 years ago, it was just a source of wagon load coal in fairly small numbers, and the trouble spot was halfway down the line at a coal mine that has long since been raised from the ground. But when you think of all the possibilities that you have foreseen at the site, it stimulates you to think of other uses for the site. And I just hope that industry, economic development, and Wales in general can appreciate what you're in the course of developing. And I just hope that we can help if a word needs putting anywhere or some pressure needs putting, we can be there when it's needed.
Well,
thanks both.
So too. Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
And I can't think of any other really more suitable sites, even in Wales or the rest of England.